At 5:41 in the morning, high above the Strait of Hormuz, the sound inside the F-35 cockpit changed. It was not the gentle tone of a routine patrol. It was not the usual background noise of a crowded airspace. This sound was sharper, colder, and impossible to ignore. It cut through the steady airflow, the engine vibration, and the quiet pressure of flying over one of the most closely watched waterways on the planet. A focused radar track had appeared. The pilot of the U.S. Navy F-35C Lightning II did not react with panic. He did not jerk the aircraft away. He did not rush the controls. His left hand stayed firm on the throttle. His right hand remained steady on the stick. Inside the helmet display, a red threat marker began to pulse at the edge of the tactical picture. Bearing west, high altitude, closing speed increasing. The aircraft behind that signal was old, but it was not harmless. An Iranian F-14 Tomcat. For one brief moment, the cockpit felt almost silent. Only the low hum of the systems and the pilot's controlled breathing filled the space around him. Below, the Strait of Hormuz stretched out like a dark blue corridor, packed with tanker routes, patrol lines, and invisible boundaries that nobody wanted to cross by mistake. Farther south, a U.S. carrier strike group moved in formation. Its flight deck was just beginning to wake under the first orange edge of sunrise. The F-35 was not alone. It never truly was. But at 30,000 feet above the water, the first choice belonged to one pilot. He looked left. Nothing but empty sky and layers of haze. He looked right. The horizon was still clear. The Tomcat was too far away to see with the naked eye, but the F-35 already knew enough. Its sensors were building the picture faster than any human eye ever could. Radar emissions, heat traces, bearing shifts, signal strength, movement patterns. Then a second contact appeared, slightly lower, offset to the south. Two aircraft. Both inbound. Both Iranian. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, those same contacts appeared on glowing displays. The room did not erupt into noise. It became tighter, sharper, more focused. Sailors leaned closer to their consoles. Watch officers adjusted their headsets. A tactical action officer marked the track and waited for confirmation. Possible F-14 pair. Western approach. No transponder, no radio response. The captain stood behind the watch team and said nothing at first. He simply watched the lines on the display begin to close. Outside, on the flight deck, yellow shirts moved between parked aircraft. Steam drifted across the catapults. Two Super Hornets sat chained and armed, facing toward the bow. Their pilots were not yet in the cockpit, but they were close enough to move fast if the order came. At 5:42, the first radio call went out. Iranian military aircraft, this is a United States naval aircraft operating in international airspace. Maintain safe distance and identify your intentions. There was no answer. The F-35 pilot waited 3 seconds, then 5, then 10, still nothing. The Iranian jets kept coming. The lead Tomcat climbed slightly, keeping its nose high enough to improve radar reach. That mattered. The F-14 belonged to another era. It was built for long-range interception and Cold War skies. But an older aircraft can still be dangerous when it carries capable sensors, long-range systems, and a pilot willing to push the boundary. The second Tomcat dropped lower and slid wider to the south, not close enough to create an immediate crisis. Not yet. But the pattern was clear. One high, one low, one watching, one pressing. It was an old intimidation move disguised as a patrol. Inside the F-35, the threat display sharpened again. The radar energy changed. It was no longer a broad search pattern. It was tighter, more deliberate. The F-14 was no longer simply looking. It was trying to hold him. At 5:43, the F-35 pilot keyed his mic. Tomcat has gone active. 6 words. That was enough. On the carrier, the Combat Information Center moved from observation into controlled response. The E-2D Hawkeye orbiting farther east was brought fully into the track. Aegis destroyers in the formation began recording the radar behavior. Electronic warfare teams opened passive collection windows. Nobody escalated, nobody overreacted, nobody needed to. The Americans were not guessing, they were documenting. The second warning went out, this time firmer. Iranian aircraft, you are maneuvering unsafely near United States naval aircraft. Alter course immediately. Again, there was no response. At 5:44, the two Tomcats crossed inside 50 nautical miles. In an older air combat mindset, that might still feel like a comfortable distance. In modern airspace, it is a countdown. High-speed systems can change the situation faster than explanations can catch up. And over Hormuz, seconds are not just seconds. They are policy, survival, and history compressed into one cockpit decision. The F-35 pilot did not activate his own radar. He did not give the Tomcats what they wanted. Instead, he adjusted his course by only a few degrees. Subtle enough to avoid escalation, precise enough to reshape the intercept. The lead Iranian jet held the track for another moment. That was the mistake. Every pulse from its radar was being captured. Every shift in frequency, every scan pattern, every attempt to maintain contact, all of it fed directly into the U.S. Navy's electronic picture. The Tomcat thought it was applying pressure. In reality, it was broadcasting its own fingerprint into one of the most advanced sensor networks ever built. At 5:45, the F-35 dipped slightly, slipping into a cleaner, low observable angle. On the Iranian radar scope, the contact would not simply vanish. That would be too cinematic. What happened was more frustrating. It became uncertain, a blur, a trace, a contact that refused to remain where the radar expected it to be. The F-14S continued forward, but the encounter had already changed shape. They had challenged what appeared to be one stealth fighter above Hormuz. What they had actually touched was the outer layer of an entire carrier strike group. And the U.S. Navy was listening to every signal. At 5:47, the lead Tomcat accelerated. Not a full aggressive climb, not a dramatic charge, just enough speed to change the mood. Inside the F-35 cockpit, the closure rate ticked upward. The Iranian aircraft was still beyond visual range, still only a symbol on the helmet display. But the geometry had become sharper, more intentional. The lead F-14 stayed high, using its radar like a lantern in the dark. The second Tomcat remained lower and wider, building a broad bracket around the American jet. That was the message. 2 aircraft, 2 angles, 1 line of pressure. The U.S. Navy pilot did not chase either of them. He let the picture develop. Below him, the Strait of Hormuz was coming alive in the morning light. Tankers crawled through shipping lanes. Patrol boats cut thin white scars across the surface. Somewhere beneath that water, submarines listened. Somewhere above, satellites watched. But in that exact moment, the center of the encounter was a quiet cockpit, a blinking threat queue, and 2 older Iranian fighters trying to make a 5th-generation jet reveal more than it wanted to. The Tomcats were loud in the electromagnetic spectrum. The F-35 was not. That difference mattered. At 5:48, the lead Iranian F-14 increased radar output. The signal reached the F-35's passive sensors stronger than before. The aircraft's computers classified it, compared it, measured it, and stored it in real time. The pilot barely needed to move. His jet was already doing what it was built to do. Listen first. Understand first. Respond only if necessary. On board the carrier, the same data flowed into the Combat Information Center. The tactical display showed the F-35 as a calm blue symbol. The 2 Iranian jets appeared as red tracks sliding inward from the west. The E-2D Hawkeye widened the picture from above the fight. An Aegis destroyer on the outer screen began passive tracking. Its own systems remained quiet, but fully awake. No one had crossed the final line. But every watch officer in that room understood the pace. The Iranians were not just flying near the formation, they were testing the response chain. How long until another warning? How long until the F-35 turned away? How long until the carrier launched more aircraft? At 5:49, the lower Tomcat shifted heading by only a few degrees. Enough to matter. It was moving toward a cutoff angle, the kind of maneuver designed to force the F-35 into a choice. Hold course and accept pressure, or turn away and appear pushed back. From the outside, it looked like simple aerial intimidation. Inside the Navy's network, it was something else. A data event. The F-35 captured the turn. The Hawkeye confirmed it. The destroyer logged it. The carrier's electronic warfare team matched the timing against a brief burst of Iranian-side radio traffic. The burst was too short for words to matter, but not too short for collection. Frequency, duration, signal strength, rhythm, pattern. Every piece went into the file. The Tomcats were trying to shape the sky. The U.S. Navy was mapping the hands that were shaping it. At 5:50, the F-35 pilot heard a calm voice from the Hawkeye. Picture clean beyond the pair. No additional airborne contacts inside 100 miles. That mattered. It meant Iran had sent 2 visible aircraft, not a larger package. A challenge, not a coordinated move. A probe, not the opening of something bigger. But probes can still turn dangerous when aircraft, pride, and high speed meet in the same sky. The pilot answered with one word: copy. He adjusted altitude slightly, keeping the jet in a low observable posture. No dramatic turn, no aggressive signal, no flood of radar energy. He gave the Tomcats nothing clean to hold. The lead F-14 tried anyway. At 5:51, the radar track strengthened again. The warning tone sharpened for half a second, then faded as the F-35 changed angle. On an Iranian scope, the American jet would have looked unstable. There, then not quite there. A contact that refused to behave like a normal aircraft. That is the quiet power of stealth. It does not need to disappear completely. It only needs to make the other side doubt. Back on the carrier deck, the alert crew moved with purpose. 2 Super Hornets were being prepared. plane captains checked surfaces. Ordnance crews cleared the rails. A shooter stood near the catapult, watching for an order that had not come yet. Steam curled across the deck, low and white, like the ship itself was breathing. In the Combat Information Center, the captain finally spoke. Hold the line. Do not feed them a reaction. That was the Navy's answer. Not panic. Not retreat. Control. The third warning went out across the open frequency. Iranian aircraft. You are approaching U.S. naval aircraft operating in international airspace. Alter course now, Static answered. Then silence. The Tomcats kept coming. At 5:52, the distance dropped below 45 nautical miles. The lower F-14 drifted wider, trying to stretch the F-35's attention. The lead aircraft stayed high, radar active, confident, and visible. But that confidence was becoming expensive. Because every second the Tomcat held its radar on the American fighter, it gave away more than pressure. It gave away habits, timing, search behavior, adjustment patterns, how Iran's aging interceptors reacted under stress. The F-14S thought they were making the F-35 blink. They were wrong. They were moving deeper into the sensor net. At 5:53, the F-35 pilot made his move. Not toward them, not away from them. He slid laterally just enough to change the math without breaking support from the formation below. The Tomcat's radar hold flickered. The lead Iranian jet corrected, then corrected again. Small movements, small delays. But in air combat, small delays revealed the truth. The F-35 had taken control of the geometry. The Iranians had the noise. The Americans had the picture. By 5:53, the distance had dropped below 40 nautical miles. In another era, that might have felt manageable. Not here, not over Hormuz, not with two Iranian F-14 Tomcats pressing from the west and a U.S. Navy F-35C holding the line between them and the carrier strike group below. Inside the F-35 cockpit, the pilot watched the intercept tighten. The lead Tomcat remained high and active, trying to pin the stealth fighter in place. The second Tomcat stayed lower and wider, searching for an angle that would force the American jet to react. It was an old-school tactic. Pressure from altitude, pressure from the flank. Make the other aircraft move first, but the F-35 was not built to play by old rules. The pilot did not chase the lower aircraft. He did not climb toward the lead Tomcat. He did not fill the sky with radar energy just to prove he was there. Instead, he shifted again, smooth and almost invisible, changing bearing by a few degrees and letting the passive sensors continue their work. On the Iranian side, that small move created a problem. The lead F-14's radar track weakened, then sharpened, then weakened again. Not gone. Worse. Unreliable. A target that appears, smears, and shifts is often more difficult than a target that simply disappears. It forces the other pilot to guess, and guessing at that range is how small decisions become very large problems. At 5:54, the F-35 pilot received the update from the E-2D Hawkeye east of the carrier group. Lead Tomcat remains active. Trailer has widened. No signs of immediate escalation. That last part mattered. It meant the Iranians were still below the final threshold, still playing pressure games, still trying to intimidate without crossing into something larger. But each second of focused radar tracking made the line thinner. Below the encounter, the carrier strike group moved with brutal calm. The carrier held course. The destroyers held their screen. The Combat Information Center stayed composed. Inside CIC, the tactical plot had become a layered web. The F-35 was one node. The Hawkeye was another. Aegis destroyers added surface-based tracking. Electronic warfare teams captured emissions from the Tomcats and from radar sites along the Iranian coast. The Americans were no longer watching only the two fighters. They were watching the system behind them. At 5:55, a coastal radar lit up from the Iranian side. Short duration, high power, then gone. A search pulse, not a final tracking mode, but enough to confirm coordination. The F-14S were not freelancing. Someone on the ground was watching the same sky and giving them confidence. In the carrier's CIC, an electronic warfare officer marked the signal. Coastal emitter active, western sector, short pulse. The captain's response was quiet. Log it, that was all. No drama, no speech, no raised voice, just evidence. In modern naval aviation, evidence is often the first tool drawn. At 5:56, the lower Tomcat made its move. It turned slightly inward, pushing toward a geometry that would place the F-35 between both Iranian aircraft. Not close enough for a visual confrontation. Not clear enough to be treated as a direct hostile act. But aggressive enough to trigger every professional instinct in the American pilot's body. The F-35 answered without emotion. It descended 500 feet, rolled gently left, and placed the lead Tomcat at a worse angle. The radar track flickered again. The Iranian pilot corrected. Then the lower Tomcat corrected. Two separate aircraft were now adjusting to one quiet decision. That was the shift. The Tomcats were no longer shaping the encounter. They were reacting to it. The F-35 pilot keyed his mic. "I have control of geometry." Inside the Hawkeye, controllers saw it instantly. The American jet had not retreated. It had not charged forward. It had moved just enough to pull both Iranian fighters into a less favorable alignment while keeping the carrier group behind a protected defense bubble. From the deck of the carrier, the next layer came alive. At 5:57, two F/A-18E Super Hornets were ordered to man and prepare. Pilots climbed into cockpits. Crew chiefs pulled pins. Final checks moved quickly across the deck. The aircraft were not launching yet, but they were no longer background metal. They were the next sentence in the conversation. The Iranians could not see the full conversation. That was the point. At 5:58, the F-35 transmitted again on the open frequency. "Iranian aircraft, you are maneuvering unsafely near United States naval aircraft in international airspace. Alter course immediately." This time, there was a response. Not words, a radar pulse. The lead F-14 tried to strengthen its hold. For one brief moment, it burned brighter on the F-35 sensors like a flashlight aimed into fog. And that was exactly what the Navy needed. The emission was clean, strong, easy to classify. Every detail moved through the F-35's mission systems and into the wider network. The Tomcat tried to apply pressure. Instead, it handed the Americans another piece of itself. At 5:59, the F-35 changed altitude again, small, precise, cold. The Tomcat's radar hold broke. Inside the Iranian cockpit, the display would have shown uncertainty at the worst possible time. The American aircraft was still out there, still close, still controlling the airspace. But the radar could not hold it long enough to make the pressure real. Then the F-35 appeared again from a slightly different angle, long enough to be noticed, not long enough to be solved. That was not an accident. That was a message. You cannot find me when you want to. I can show myself when I choose to. By 6 o'clock, the sky over Hormuz had changed. The Iranian Tomcats were still inbound, still loud, still visible, but the initiative had shifted completely. The F-14S had come to challenge the F-35. Now they were feeding it information, and below them the U.S. carrier strike group was ready. At 6 o'clock, the lead Tomcat made the mistake older fighters often make against fifth-generation aircraft. It tried to see with radar what had already been seeing it from every direction. The Iranian F-14 held altitude, nose pointed east, radar active, still searching for a clean hold on the American stealth fighter. For a moment, the signal strengthened again. The Tomcat pushed harder into the morning sky, trying to overpower uncertainty with raw output. Inside the F-35 cockpit, the warning tone returned. Short, sharp, unstable. The pilot did not flinch. He watched the symbol pulse, fade, and reappear across his helmet display. The Tomcat was trying to force a steady track, but every second it transmitted, every adjustment it made, every correction in its search pattern was being captured, classified, and shared. The F-35 was no longer just avoiding the track, it was studying it. At 6:01, the American pilot shifted again. A shallow bank, a slight altitude change, a clean reposition to the north. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would look aggressive from the outside, but the effect was immediate. The lead Tomcat's track broke for the second time. In the Iranian cockpit, the F-35 would not have looked like a clean target. It would have looked like a problem. There, gone, offset, then there again. A ghost with intent. The second Tomcat reacted first. It widened its turn, trying to preserve the bracket. That was the moment the U.S. Navy's network saw the Iranian formation begin to stretch. The two aircraft were no longer moving as one machine. They were compensating. The lower jet was correcting for what the lead jet could not hold. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, the tactical plot made the shift obvious. Trailer is drifting wide. Lead still active. Formation spacing increasing. The captain stood behind the watch team, eyes fixed on the display. Keep recording. No one needed to ask why. This was no longer just an intercept. It was a profile. A full behavioral map of how Iran's aging Tomcats reacted when a stealth fighter refused to play by old rules. Another radar pulse came from the Iranian coast, shorter than before, stronger than before. The electronic warfare team marked it instantly. Ground support had not gone quiet. Someone ashore was still trying to help the Tomcats hold the picture, still trying to make sense of what the aircraft in the sky could not solve alone. The Hawkeye called it across the net. Coastal emitter active again. Same sector. The F-35 pilot heard it but kept his eyes forward. His job was not to chase ground radar. His job was to hold the line in the air. And he was holding it. At 6:03, the carrier answered with the next layer. The catapult officer dropped to one knee and pointed forward. The first F/A-18E Super Hornet launched into the sunrise. Steam burst across the deck. The jet disappeared off the bow, afterburners glowing orange against the pale horizon. Seconds later, the second Super Hornet followed, climbing hard into the eastern sky with a full air-to-air loadout. The message was clear. The F-35 was still in control, but now it was no longer alone in a way the Iranians could ignore. Inside the lead Tomcat, warning receivers would have shown a busier sky. More contacts. More emissions. More American systems waking up around them. Not one source, multiple sources. A carrier air wing, an E-2D Hawkeye, Aegis destroyers, and a stealth fighter already positioned exactly where it wanted to be. The Tomcats had challenged 2 aircraft. They had awakened an entire carrier strike group. At 6:04, the lower F-14 turned inward again, as if trying to recover the original intercept geometry. It was a proud move. Maybe disciplined, maybe ordered from the ground. But it came too late. The American network had already built the battle picture around it. The F-35 pilots saw the turn before it mattered. The Hawkeye saw the altitude change. The destroyers saw the radar behavior. The carrier saw the entire formation losing coherence in real time. This is what 5th-generation warfare looks like when it works. No cinematic dogfight, no dramatic sky trails, no fire in the clouds. Just one side becoming more certain, while the other becomes less certain with every passing second. At 6:05, the F-35 gave the Tomcats one more warning. Iranian aircraft, you are approaching a defensive air patrol protecting United States naval forces in international airspace. Alter course now. For the first time, the silence did not feel aggressive. It felt heavy. The lead Tomcat held course for another few seconds, long enough to prove it had not simply been scared away, long enough to satisfy whoever was listening from the ground, but not long enough to change the outcome. Then its nose shifted. Only a few degrees, but in air combat, a few degrees can say more than a radio call. The lead F-14 began turning northeast. The lower Tomcat hesitated. That hesitation was logged too. One aircraft turning, one aircraft holding. Formation discipline bending under pressure. Inside the carrier CIC, nobody celebrated, nobody laughed, nobody clapped. The watch team simply marked the time. Lead Tomcat changing heading. Trailer maintaining. Super Hornets climbing through 20,000. The captain nodded once. Do not pursue beyond the line. That mattered. The U.S. Navy was not trying to humiliate them. It was not trying to force a dramatic ending. It was doing exactly what it had trained to do. Defend the carrier. Control escalation. Make the other side decide whether pride was worth the cost. At 6:06, the second Tomcat finally followed. Its turn was wider, slower, less clean, and that told the story. The Iranians had pressed hard, but they had found no opening. No clean advantage, no American retreat, no panic inside the carrier group. Only a wall of sensors, aircraft, discipline, and silence. The F-35 stayed on station. The Super Hornets continued climbing. The Hawkeye kept the sky stitched together. The Aegis destroyers held their tracks without showing their full hand. Below them, the Strait of Hormuz kept moving. Tankers, patrol boats, white wakes, morning light. To anyone watching from the water, it may have looked like nothing happened. But above them, the encounter had already been decided. The Tomcats came in loud. The U.S. Navy answered with a network, and the network won. At 6:07, the lead Iranian F-14 turned away from the intercept line. No dramatic flash, no breaking moment. No cinematic radio confession. Just a few degrees of heading change across a tactical display. The kind of movement that tells professionals everything they need to know. Inside the F-35 cockpit, the pilot watched the Tomcat's vector bend northeast. The second aircraft followed seconds later, slower and wider than before. Their radar emissions dropped in intensity. The hard pressure was gone. The American pilot did not chase. That mattered. He held altitude, maintained distance, and kept the aircraft in a defensive posture between the Iranian fighters and the carrier strike group below. The mission had never been to start a fight. It had been to hold the sky, protect the ships, and force the other side to make the smarter decision before pride turned into something far more serious. At 6:08, the E-2D Hawkeye confirmed the turn. Both Tomcats are cold. Tracking northeast, no signs of immediate escalation. Cold. In fighter language, that single word changes the feeling in the room. It means the aircraft are moving away. It means the immediate pressure is dropping. It means every sailor, pilot, controller, and watch officer can breathe a little deeper without letting discipline slip. Inside the carrier's Combat Information Center, there was no applause, no cheering, no Hollywood moment, just keyboards, headsets, radar scopes, and men and women continuing their watch as if the last 26 minutes had not carried the weight of a regional crisis. The tactical action officer marked the timeline. The electronic warfare team saved the data package. The air warfare coordinator maintained the combat air patrol. The captain looked at the display and gave one order: continue recording until they clear the area. Because in modern naval warfare, the end of a confrontation is not the moment the other aircraft turns away. It is the moment the evidence is complete. At 6:09, the Super Hornets reached station. They did not push toward the Iranian aircraft. They formed a wider defensive arc, visible enough to reinforce the message, controlled enough to avoid turning restraint into provocation. Their radar posture remained disciplined. Their systems stayed ready. Their presence alone said everything that needed to be said. The F-35 stayed quiet, and that silence had done more than any threat. The Iranian Tomcats had arrived loud, visible, and confident. They had used radar pressure, formation tactics, and the weight of an old legend to challenge a fifth-generation aircraft over one of the most sensitive waterways on Earth. But the U.S. Navy did not answer with noise. It answered with geometry, with sensors, with patience, with a carrier strike group that could escalate at any second, but did not need to. At 6:11, the Iranian coastal radar pulsed once more. Shorter this time, almost like a final glance. The destroyer screen captured it. The Hawkeye tagged it. The F-35 logged the emission through its passive systems. Another data point, another signature, another piece of the larger picture. That was the part the Tomcats could not avoid. Every second they had spent trying to pressure the American jet had cost them something. Radar behavior, formation discipline, response timing, ground control coordination, communication rhythm. How long they held pressure, how quickly they adjusted when the network tightened around them. None of that looked dramatic from the outside, but to analysts, it was valuable. The F-14 is a legendary aircraft, fast, powerful, built in an era when long-range radar and heavy intercept capability could dominate the sky before opponents ever saw each other. In the right hands, it still deserves respect. The U.S. Navy knows that better than anyone. It once flew the Tomcat from its own decks. But legends do not stop time. And over Hormuz that morning, the Tomcat met something it was never designed to face. A stealth aircraft tied into a living network of ships, airborne controllers, radar systems, electronic warfare teams, and carrier-based fighters. The Iranian pilots brought pressure, the Americans brought the picture, and in modern air combat, the side with the picture usually writes the ending. At 6:14, the two F-14s passed beyond the immediate threat range. The F-35 remained on station. The Super Hornets continued their patrol. The carrier did not alter course. The destroyers did not reveal more than necessary. The strike group kept moving through Hormuz exactly as planned. That was the message. Not retreat, not panic, not escalation, control. For Iran, the encounter could still be framed as a challenge. Two Tomcats had pressed toward American stealth aircraft and forced a response from a carrier strike group. That version might sound strong in a headline. It might look impressive in a short clip. It might satisfy people who mistake proximity for power. But inside the logs, the story was different. The Tomcats failed to push the F-35 away. They failed to disrupt the carrier's movement. They failed to create a clean tactical advantage. And they gave the U.S. Navy a clear look at how they behave under pressure. At 6:17, the F-35 pilot finally received the call. Maintain patrol. Threat downgraded. He answered once. Copy. Nothing more. Below him, the Strait of Hormuz continued moving. Oil tankers crossed the morning lanes. Patrol boats left thin wakes across the water. The carrier's flight deck returned to rhythm. Sailors reset equipment, checked logs, and prepared for the next launch cycle. To the world, it looked like nothing happened. No debris, no dramatic sky footage, no breaking news banner. But that is how these encounters often end when professionals stay in control. Sometimes the most important victory is the one that leaves no wreckage behind. The Iranian Tomcats came in with radar pressure and old-school confidence. The F-35 answered with silence, patience, and control. And over Hormuz that morning, silence won. So here's the question. If you were the F-35 pilot watching an Iranian Tomcat build radar pressure over Hormuz, would you hold steady and trust the system, or would you push back harder before the next move came? Drop your answer in the comments. And if you want more real-world naval and aerial encounters where discipline decides the outcome before anything leaves the rail, subscribe and join the fleet. Because out here, in the narrow skies above the world's most sensitive waterways, power is not always the aircraft making the most noise. Sometimes it is the one that never has to.